7.1, greatest common factor and factoring by grouping. Remember, greatest common factor can also be written as GCF. It's easier to write GCF than to write out greatest common factor. So on page 557 in your book, I want to look at, we'll start with number 50. And we need to look at the problem, and the directions ask us to factor. Usually when you factor, you always check the problem to see if there is a GCF, a greatest common factor. And if we look at this problem carefully, if you're just looking at the -3, the -6, and the -9, your greatest common factor is the number that divides all of these, the largest number that goes into -3, -6, and -9, and that would be a -3. So we could factor out a -3, and then in terms of the x and the y, to factor out your GCF, look for the x that has the smallest exponent, that would be x squared, and then the y with the smallest exponent is y to the third. So that's our GCF, and then we have our parentheses, and then basically you need to write your trinomial that you get once you factor out your GCF. So let's see, we factored out from the first term, you factored out the -3, you factored out the x squared, and we factored out y to the third. That means there's just one y left, plus, since you factored out a negative, the signs will change, so now it's plus. From the second term, we took out a -3, so then we have to have a 2 here, because -3 times 2 gives us the -6. We factored out x squared, so there's one x left, and you factored out y cubed, so there's one y, plus -3 times 3, and that gives us just +3. And that's completely factored. Number 56 is slightly different. What you want to do is look at the problem as a whole, and we do not want to distribute the 9a, and we don't want to distribute the -1 either. What you want to do is look at the first part and the second part, and notice that they both have an x plus 1 binomial. So what we're going to do is we're going to factor that out, and you need to use parentheses. Okay, so that's your common binomial. Okay, that gets factored out, and then we have to be careful here. Since we have a negative here, you can remind yourself, just put a 1, and once x plus 1 is factored out, you're left with a 9a minus 1, and that's our final answer right there. Okay, number 62. In this problem, we also have in this section factoring by grouping. So how do you know that you're going to factor by grouping? You count the number of terms, really important. 1, 2, 3, 4. If you have 4 or more terms, grouping would be a good way to start. And what we normally do for grouping is you try to group the first two and the last two terms together, and we factor out the GCF from the first two, factor out the GCF from the second two, and see what happens once that's done. Sometimes you might need to rearrange the terms in order to factor. Let's leave it this way for this problem and see what happens. From the first two terms, we could factor out a 3. And then we have parentheses x plus y. Make sure you bring down your sign, plus. From the second two, we could take out an a, factor out an a, that's your GCF, and you have x plus y in parentheses. Now this part of the problem looks very similar to number 56. Notice that if you are using grouping, and if you did it correctly, the binomial in the parentheses, in both cases, they have to be exactly the same. If these are exactly the same, that means we have grouped them correctly, and we can move on to the next step. So the common binomial is going to be x plus y. and that gets factored out. And in the second parentheses, we have 3 plus a, and then we're done. And we're going to stop at number 62 for this one. So skip 78.